Hey gang, Adam Von Romer here, author, speaker, seminar leader, 32-year veteran of the commercial investment real estate world, and founder of the Commercial Investment Real Estate Academy. And I've been getting a lot of questions from young, or I should say newer agents or agents who are looking to make the transition into commercial. And I decided to put together a little quick lesson here on everything you wanted to know about commercial real estate but were afraid to ask. And I took the top 10 or so questions and kind of put them all together, and I'm going to walk through that now and maybe help clarify the topic a little bit. So number one, what's the biggest difference between commercial real estate and residential real estate? I think the most glaring and certainly the most important thing to know is that commercial real estate is a business-to-business transaction. It's a rational decision-making process, and it is 180 degrees reversed from the residential process. It's very, very rational. There's very little, if any, emotion involved in it. It's basically, does it make sense? Is it in the location that we need? And does it help enrich our bottom line? So it's very rational. It's a business-to-business transaction, and it's not much more, let's say, how would I characterize this as? It's probably a lot more straightforward. There's a lot less, agonizing in a transaction because it comes down to location and numbers. Unlike residential real estate, 99.9% of the commercial buyers don't care what school district it's in, what color the carpet is, if it even has carpet. It just needs to enhance their bottom line. So rational decision-making process, very, very different than residential. It's all about the numbers. Number two, is commercial real estate hard to learn? I'd suggest that it's no harder to learn than getting your real estate license in the first place. The difference is that you have to learn early in your career when you make that transition to be a specialist, because you can't learn it all. It's just impossible. And there's really too much to learn about any one type of product to be a master of all 5 or 6 different products. So yeah, there's a lot to learn, and the learning curve is pretty steep initially. But after a while, it almost becomes rote, because what we're really doing here is we're trading, generally speaking, income streams. So once you've gotten that under your belt and you've really gotten your arms around it, yes, there's a learning curve. Yes, there's quite a bit to learn, but it's not that difficult. And a lot of people get put off because they think it's all about doing spreadsheets and projections and numbers. And really and truly, that's not the majority of the business. It does happen, and you do have to do it, but it's not what drives it. Number 3, how long does it take to become successful? That entirely depends on a couple of things. First off, it depends on whether you're getting training and support and if you have a mentor. Because when I got started, I had nobody. And literally, it took me about 3 years to actually make the transition. And I mean, I got beat to death. There was no resources out there, and the only guys that had any training or support were the big boys. So basically, I had to kind of learn by mistake, and boy, did I make them. So if you've got training, support, and a mentor, you can be successful and start making some serious money in your first year. If you're doing it yourself and pretty much reinventing the wheel, it's going to take you probably about 3 years to really come into your own and to start making some money and start becoming successful at it. Number 4, how soon do you start to make money? Well, that's a good question, and it really depends on what your focus is. If you're going to be focusing in leasing, you'll make money a lot sooner, but it's going to be smaller paychecks. If you're in investment sales, it takes longer. Typically, the sales cycle on the investment side is about 6 months. So if you got started today, you could expect your first paycheck about 6 months from today. If, however, you were involved in leasing, you could literally be putting the lease together and getting paid inside of 2 months. So it really depends on what you focus on and what your specialization is. So typically, you have to be prepared to go about 6 months without getting paid. And that's usually about when I see people making their first check. Okay, number 5, what is the learning curve? Well, the learning curve is pretty steep. In fact, a lot of the work, it's kind of like a front-loaded business. A lot of the work, a lot of the things you need to learn, a lot of the skills and the tools that you have to master are all front loaded. Your first 6 months are going to be a really, it's just going to be a slog. You've got a lot to learn. You've got to start prospecting and building out your market. And it's a pretty steep learning curve. After that, after you've gotten the basics and gotten your arms around your market and your product type, it kind of flattens out then. But one of the things that I would encourage you to do is make sure that no matter what else happens, you become a student of your product type and you really stay focused and concentrate in that area. Because ultimately what you need to do is you need to know what it costs to own, operate, maintain, manage, and ultimately dispose of a piece of property in your marketplace. So that takes some time and it takes some skill, but that's what you need to get through. And again, the first 6 months are probably the toughest. Do I need any special equipment? No. What you're really going to need is you're going to need a good digital camera. I'd recommend a laptop. I like to use my 17-inch screen because I like to be able to read things, especially now that I'm over 50. Sometimes the reading glasses aren't strong enough. So, no, you might need an ultrasonic measuring device of some sort, or a rolling tape, or even what they call a surveyor's tape, especially if you're going to be working in warehouses. But really and truly, most of what you're going to need is going to be software and support. So, no, there's no real special equipment required, other than maybe, like I said, a calculator, a digital camera, and a good laptop. So that should be the least of your concerns. Number 7, how do I choose a specialization? Now, this is a good question. One of the things that I kind of coach new agents on is to pick a specialization based on what they know. So, for example, if I was working with somebody who's literally making the transition out of manufacturing or, let's say, distribution of some sort, I might coach them to go into the industrial market because they know how industrial space is used, they know how industrial space is looked at, and they know how, users of industrial space, what they really need or want in a building. And they might be able to translate that into some market conversancy and help people who need industrial space, whether it's leasing or sales. If somebody's particularly enamored with the retail industry or is coming out of the retail industry, maybe retail is a good and logical choice. They know how retailers use the space. They know how retailers like to have their space. And it might help them in their prospecting because they were, in fact, in the retailer's shoes, so they understand the business. Now, what I have coached, I can't tell you how many new agents to do and continue to coach them to do is, I would look to set yourself up in a market that has some velocity. That's really what I want to see happen. Because what I want to try and do is I want to try and get new agents a win and get them a check as quickly as I can. And to that end, what I will traditionally do is, for example, if you're looking, you got 1 foot in residential and 1 foot in commercial, what I'd recommend you start doing, even today, is start looking at the 4 and 5 unit buildings, the little residential 4 and 5 unit buildings in the marketplace. Because 1, they trade frequently, and 2, they're literally still classified as a residential property. So while you're kind of making the transition to commercial, you're still, got 1 foot in residential. It's easy to understand. You're dealing with a less sophisticated seller. And I don't mean to be disparaging with that, but you don't have to wait for the board to make a decision. Usually you're sitting there talking to mom and pop over a cup of coffee, and they can make the decision right there and then. So that's what I'd suggest you look at. Go with what you know. If you're, like, for example, I know an attorney who left the law practice, imagine that, and helps attorneys lease space and find space. Well, who better? He knows how they utilize the space. He knows what their unique needs are, and it just kind of made sense for him. So how do you choose a specialization? What interests you? What do you have an interest in? Is an office building interesting to you, or is warehousing interesting to you? Retail interesting? Because I think you'll do much better if you're specializing in a product that captures your interest and attention. So that's how I would help somebody choose a specialization. The other thing is, if you've got a mentor somebody who's going to help kind of guide you through this process, I tend to go where they go, kind of walk in their footsteps. That way you've got somebody who's kind of running interference for you, can help you, avoid the landmines and booby traps that are out there in the market and get you started a lot quicker. So I hope that kind of clarifies that. Number 8, where do I begin? The first thing I would do, like I said on the previous slide, is I'd start looking into the market and seeing what there's a lot of velocity in. Because what I want you to do is set yourself up for success. And traditionally, especially right now in the market, what you'll see is a lot of 5, 8, 10, 12 unit buildings trading on a daily basis. In fact, if you look at the Business Monday or the real estate section, you'll see a lot of this stuff transacting. And because 4 and 5 units are still classified technically as residential, you can kind of, let's say, wean your way out of strictly residential real estate and into commercial. It's easy to understand the smaller units. It's easier to, get a hold of those people. It's easier to get a decision because the decision maker usually lives on or about the property. And you're dealing with a less sophisticated seller in that you're not dealing with a board of directors. You're dealing with somebody, who you can sit down and have a cup of coffee with. So I'd say, small multi-tenant's a great place to start. They're always trading. They're easily understood. They're easy to finance. They're everywhere. I mean, all over the place. I mean, you probably couldn't hit a golf ball and not hit an apartment building here. And, people understand them. So they're easy to find, easy to locate. They sell. They transact quickly. They're easy to finance. And that's probably where I would get started. Again, unless you have a background in some other field of endeavor that naturally leads you to that, I would stick with, small apartments to begin with. And then once you kind of got your feet wet, start to look at other options. I mean, my first commercial transaction was a 5-unit apartment building in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And I haven't looked back since. So, I would look at the smaller apartment buildings, and that's where I would probably get started because of the velocity and because of the ease of entry. Number 9, what's the most important thing I can do to make the transition? Plan ahead. First off, you really need to start to think about how you're going to do it, and I would literally go and drive the market. I would take a look, for example, at those 4, 5, 8, 10, 12 unit buildings, and then make a plan. And if you don't have a plan, I'd come up with one. I'd make a serious effort to come up with a plan. Now, in my training program, I have a whole hierarchy of activity that I put together. I call it the productivity pyramid. And literally what it talks about is, first off, defining your market, finding out who owns what, where, and in what capacity. How do they own it? And then I go through the process of doing the secret weapon letter, cold calls, which are actually warm calls. And that's really the genesis of your business. So what you want to start doing is you want to start reaching out to those people now, and start kind of fanning the flames, if you will, and maybe get, a 4-unit, 5-unit, 8-unit, and kind of start to get that focus going, and start to pay more and more attention to that side of your business and less attention to the residential. The other thing is you need to really, really make sure you're prepared for it, not only financially as you make the transition, but I'd say psychologically, because a lot of people have a hard time going for 9 months or 6 months without getting a paycheck. And I'd say that's probably the toughest part of making the transition, is that scary no paycheck for 6 months part. It's pretty tough, especially as you watch your savings account dwindle. So those are probably the most critical things to help you in making a transition from residential to commercial. And number 10, are there any resources out there that could help me? There are training programs out there, but the challenge I have with those is the vast majority of them talk about what to do, but they don't show you what to do. And that's a real challenge, especially when you're getting started, because it's kind of like, well, go do this. Well, yeah, how do you do that? So unlike that type of situation, I have a training program that basically shows you what to do and, is out front about it, So are there any resources out there? Yes, there are. There's some very good resources that can help you. The other thing is, I would look to see what kind of training and support your company has in commercial real estate. And if they don't, you're pretty much on your own and inventing the wheel, just reinventing the wheel every time you need to do something. And that's going to be real tough. It's going to be real difficult to make the transition. So what you need is, you need some training, you need some support, and if you can, where at all possible, you need a mentor. And that's really going to be the biggest help you can get, is somebody who will actually kind of guide you. And I jokingly say, keep you from blowing your legs off. So you want somebody who's actually got some experience in the business, somebody who's done real commercial transactions, and they can help you make that, get that start, and kind of keep you from really making big mistakes. The other thing is, you want to kind of become a student of the business, especially in your early, like I call it, formative years, because that's where that learning curve, really all that stuff really takes place and starts to make sense. So are there any resources out there? Yes, there are. And in fact, you're going to have an opportunity to take a look at some of my other stuff here shortly. But those are the top 10 questions that people ask and want answered. Thank you for joining me. Hope this helped you clarify in your mind whether it makes sense for you to make the transition to commercial real estate. The end.